Hi everyone, and welcome to WEDO's webinar on Adaptation Fund Engagement Pathways. We are here today with the Adaptation Fund Secretariat, and we'll be talking about gender just finance. So my name is Andrea Vega Troncoso, and I'm here with WEDO. I'll be giving us a brief introduction into what we're going to be talking about today. Then I'll pass it on to Young, who will talk about the Adaptation Funds and how they integrate gender into their processes and programs. Then I'll pass it to my colleague Tara, who will talk about engagement pathways for women's organizations. Lastly, Cristina, who's with the Adaptation Fund, will give us a preview of the Adaptation Fund e-course. Then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for questions and discussion. So, what do we know? Women's organizations are not accessing finance for climate solutions. Only about 10% of climate finance flows to the local level. Only about 1% of gender equality funding from governments flows to women's organizations. Lastly, only about 3% of environmental philanthropy supports women's environmental activism. In other words, of these big pools of finance for climate solutions, very little actually reaches local grassroots women's organizations. Moreover, the primary climate funds can vastly improve direct access by women's organizations. Climate finance architecture, such as that of the 4 primary climate funds, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and the CIF, are not oriented towards scaling and replicating local women-led solutions. Gender sensitivity and gender policies do not automatically entail the participation of women's organizations. So even if the fund has a gender policy, it doesn't mean women's organizations are involved in processes and programs. Lastly, processes for accessing funds are complex and lengthy, advantaging large organizations with certain types of capacity and perhaps disadvantaging and remaining inaccessible to smaller organizations such as grassroots women's organizations. So, one of WEDO's responses within our initiatives towards gender just finance has been our work with Prospera. So there are 3 pieces on the WEDO website. We released a publication covering the 4 primary climate funds' approaches to gender, potential pathways for women's organizations to engage, challenges for women's organizations in accessing climate finance as told by women's organizations themselves, and lastly, a framework for organizations seeking greater engagement. We also released an accompanying brief that's only 6 pages, which summarizes this broader report. And we also released an example from MONIS, the Mongolian Women's Fund, that demonstrates the benefits of an iterative, adaptive approach to engagement. In this case, they engaged with the Green Climate Fund. So, what will we be talking about today? Well, today we released the updated Adaptation Fund brief for 2020, which you can find on the WEDO website. This Adaptation Fund brief captures new opportunities for engagement, along with new engagement pathways. And it captures feedback from the Adaptation Fund Secretariats and the Adaptation Fund NGO network, who we're really excited to keep engaging and collaborating with. Today, we'll also revisit our 5 recommendations for women's organizations in order to frame this conversation within a larger conversation about gender and the public climate funds. We will also be highlighting ways to engage. And without further ado, I'll pass it to Young, who's with the Adaptation Fund, and will tell us more about the Adaptation Fund and how it integrates gender into its processes and programs.
Thanks, Andrea, for a great introduction. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually. My name is Young Hee Lee. I'm Governance Officer and Gender Focal Point of the Adaptation Fund. I'm going to present a brief introduction on the Adaptation Fund and its gender work, and I hope this will help you learn more about the fund today. Let's start. Next slide, please. The Adaptation Fund is the first kind of global UN fund which was created to finance concrete adaptation projects in most vulnerable developing countries. It was established in 2001 under the Kyoto Protocol and started its operations in 2007. At the beginning of 2019, the fund also started serving the Paris Agreement. One of the innovative features of the Adaptation Fund is the direct access modality, which it pioneered to build country ownership in adaptation, national adaptive capacity, and build on local expertise. To date, the Adaptation Fund has committed over $720 million and is funding 100 concrete adaptation projects on the ground and directly benefiting 8.7 million people around the world. It is also notable that half of our funded projects are in small island developing states and the least developed countries. Next slide, please. This slide shows a global distribution of the Adaptation Fund projects. As you see here, the respective pictures are taken by our colleagues during the project mission. Next, please. Most of the adaptation projects are community-based, tailored to local adaptation needs, and driven by country ownership. This slide shows that the fund has financed adaptation projects in diverse sectors, including disaster risk reduction, food security, agriculture, water management, coastal management, and multi-sector. Next, please. Developing countries can access Adaptation Fund's resources through accredited implementing entities, which can be national, regional, or multilateral. To date, there are 13 multilateral, 6 regional, 32 national implementing entities. Direct access modality enables developing countries to access funding through its national implementing entity, which can help build country ownership. To enhance access to climate finance and adaptation practices on ground, the Adaptation Fund has supported them in sharing experiences and best practices in adaptation, also building country capacities through accreditation and readiness program and project development, and also collaborating with different stakeholders, including civil society. Next slide, please. The Adaptation Fund early recognized that gender equality and women's empowerment is not a separate issue from climate change, but it's the key to achieving more effective, sustainable, and equitable climate actions, outcome, and impact. Therefore, before adopting its own gender policy, gender consideration had been already integrated as part of the Adaptation Fund's environmental and social policy in 2013. Since then, gender consideration has been integrated into the fund's operations, namely accreditation, readiness program, project development, and communication and knowledge management. With the adoption of its own gender policy in early 2016, the Adaptation Fund officially announced to move from do no harm approach to do something good to proactively address gender equality and women's empowerment. It is also noteworthy that the fund's medium-term strategy sets advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls as its cross-cutting themes, which reaffirms that gender is an integral part of the Adaptation Fund's work and program. Next, please. Currently, we are in the process of updating our own gender policy and action plan. As part of the update, the assessment on the progress and implementation of the original gender policy was conducted, And the results report reveal the positive outcomes and progress, as well as recommendations to be considered in the updated gender policy. The Adaptation Fund, as a learning institution, is also committed to learning the lessons related to gender work from its stakeholders, partner organizations, and other climate funds, as well as sharing its experiences and knowledge with them. Recently produced knowledge products also include a gender study on selected AF projects. Both assessment report and the gender study are all available on our website. Adaptation funds recognize that incorporating gender considerations throughout the project lifecycle cannot be achieved overnight. It requires gender-related capacity building and tailored support for the implementing entities and developing countries. Therefore, the fund has provided financial support for gender work, as well as producing gender guidance documents for implementing entities. Let's start, next slide, please. To find information on projects in your country where you are, on Adaptation Fund website, you can click project and program under the AEF logo as you see in the slide, and then click project information, and you can see the table view, and you can type the country name, and you will see all the projects which are being implemented in that country. For the information on the national implementing entity, you can go to apply for funding. You can see the green box, and then select implementing entities, and then click national implementing entities. This is the end of my presentation, and let me invite Tara to talk about engagement pathways.
Thank you so much, Young. I really appreciate that we're starting off with this deeper understanding of the Adaptation Fund, because it aligns so well with our first recommendation that we came out with last year as part of our 5 overarching recommendations for organizations that are really seeking deeper engagement with climate finance and with advocating for climate finance. So if you'll go on to the next slide, Andrea, we'll see that that first recommendation is to really learn the processes and procedures of the climate funds of interest so that you can better identify opportunities to engage. And as you're learning those processes and procedures, you have a real opportunity to connect with the stakeholders and networks that have already been engaging and learning, and particularly reaching out to those entities that are receiving funding and implementing projects on the ground. Within that specific stakeholder group, there's a deeper opportunity to really pitch your gender expertise, your local knowledge, the ways in which you have discovered that gender just climate solutions are happening and should be happening in your area, to those entities so that they can take advantage of your expertise as collaborators, as partners, or even as recipients of direct funding. Within the Adaptation Fund, for example, a few projects have come forth with an enhanced direct access modality, which has involved re-granting to smaller organizations. So being involved and engaged and able to pitch and apply for opportunities such as these that arise is really key. As we move to the next 2 recommendations, we're kind of shifting our focus out a bit broader to think about the importance of really understanding and mapping all of the projects and the entities that are working within your region and your area that you recognize. If you could just go back to the previous slide, Andrea. And then so that you can understand that we have a very complex set of climate finance projects that are happening, that are being planned, designed, and implemented, and can really benefit from additional monitoring, input, collaboration, and participation by the expertise that you offer as women's organizations, gender-related groups, and feminist advocates that are connected to local needs on the ground. As we're doing all of this engagement, we really want to recognize and value the ways in which we can continue learning together. So ensuring that we're sharing both our challenges and lessons learned to inform further research, both qualitatively and quantitatively, about how we can then better advance gender-responsive climate finance that really integrates women's organizations and gender-related groups and what they have to contribute. And that moves us into the 3 primary pathways that our brief that we launched today discusses. And the first of those pathways, if you'll move on to the next slide, Andrea, is really this reiteration of ways to better learn about the funds, and that's engaging with the Adaptation Fund NGO network, which is a network of civil society and indigenous peoples that have been following the Adaptation Funds, both at an institutional level and then at a project and program level, to understand what is happening in terms of implementation and monitoring. And this is a really key opportunity to deepen your understanding of the Adaptation Fund and its operations. And I know that we have a few participants in our webinar today who are already engaging with the NGO network as members. Another key thing that the Adaptation Fund NGO network does is really have that dialogue with the Adaptation Fund board as an official part of their meeting. So this really is an opportunity of looking at how to engage with the Adaptation Fund from the highest level institutionally to understanding what projects are happening on the ground and how you can connect with other actors and stakeholders working in your region and following those projects and programs. As we move on to pathway 2, we're really shifting focus to another set of actors, and that is the entities that are implementing these projects and programs on the ground, and taking advantage again of this particular expertise that women's organizations and gender-related groups can offer, particularly because the Adaptation Fund has a readiness program for climate finance and specific grant opportunities that arise for deepening the gender capacity of these national implementing entities, both in terms of their projects and programs, but also at a deeper institutional level. There's also other activities available through the readiness program. So when women's organizations are making those connections and having those conversations with the implementing entities, they can better integrate their perspectives and experiences into other activities such as stakeholder workshops and consultations that are really contributing to the overall readiness and improved ability of the implementing entities to design projects that are appropriate, effective, sustainable, and promote gender equality. Our third pathway, if we'll move on to the next slide, is one that has arisen recently. And at COP25 in Madrid, the Adaptation Fund announced that it would be offering direct access opportunities for countries that do not have those national implementing entities, which many countries do not yet. And 2 multilateral implementing entities, UNEP and UNDP, are going to be overseeing the delivery of these funds. So why the exact pathway and application process for these funds is still being developed, we really want to keep an eye on this opportunity to really directly access funds for the organizations that are working in the countries that will be eligible. And because you're participating in this webinar or have registered for this webinar, we are also going to keep you abreast as we hear more information about how this opportunity is going to work. Lastly, we really wanted to highlight that there is an additional pathway, but that it is not necessarily appropriate for the vast majority of women's organizations. And that's the opportunity to become accredited, if you'll move on to the next slide, on the to become accredited as the national implementing entity for your organization. And because this has to happen in countries that do not already have those national implementing entities, and because this is an intense process of accreditation requiring a certain amount of capacity, this might not be the best engagement pathway. But as always, we do encourage you to learn more about this process as you learn more about the Adaptation Fund. And Cristina, in just a few minutes, will be highlighting a key way to learn more about the accreditation process, which is a new multilingual course that the Adaptation Fund has been offering online for the past several months. So as we look to the future, we recognize that these really are the Adaptation Fund engagement pathways that we want to highlight specifically for women's organizations right now, but others may emerge as we move on to the next slide and recognize that the gender policy is being updated. And there are still opportunities from the previous gender policy, such as the roster of gender experts that are still being developed that can serve as potential future entry points. And we hope to engage in conversation and stay in touch about these different opportunities as they may arise. And I encourage all of you to read the brief that we are launching today in conjunction with this webinar, because it highlights these pathways, but also links to various resources that can help you better understand each of these pathways and point you in the direction of figuring out how you want to engage more deeply with the Adaptation Fund. With that, I'm really excited to hand it over to Cristina because she is going to be sharing more information about the e-course.
Thank you, Tara, and good morning, everyone. Allow me, I assume I have to share my screen, correct?
Yes, and you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
And then I would like to put it in, I don't know how to move. Hold on, just bear with me for 1 second so I can put it in presentation mode. I don't have access to the right side of my screen in the share mode. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Can everyone see it? Okay. So thank you, Tara and Andrea, and it's a pleasure to speak at this webinar and be able to present these new tools that we have developed. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to a somewhat new suite of capacity building tools that the AF has produced to help entities and prospective entities, including grassroots organizations, access funding for climate change adaptation through direct access. Hang on. It's not moving to the next slide. The e-course titled Direct Access, State-of-the-Art versus the Fund's Accreditation and the Fund's Project Preparation Process. It is also an important tool for capacity building at national as well as at sub-national level, as it tackles the specific challenges and opportunities associated with the direct access modality, and in particular the capacity gaps in financial management and fiduciary standards, as well as environmental, social, and gender standards and its mitigation factors. The course, as it is organized in 2 modules, each containing case studies and short quizzes throughout, as well as a final test for each module. Each module also takes around 3 hours to complete in 1 sitting, but you can save your answers to the quizzes and return at a later date. A certificate is issued upon completion of both modules, so essentially the user has to pass 80% of the questions and then will be issued a certificate. You also have the option to download and save the notes from each session for easy reference, as well as to print them. And most importantly, the course is free of charge and is currently available in English and French, and will very soon be available in Spanish as well. And we're talking a week or 2 weeks time. So the first module addresses issues related to the accreditation process to the fund, and consists of 3 lessons. Lesson 1 looks at the definition of a designated authority and its role in nominating an entity to apply for accreditation to the Adaptation Fund. Lesson 2 goes over the fiduciary standards and ways in which these apply to different types of accreditation and reaccreditation processes. And then finally, lesson 3 goes over the steps and governing bodies involved in the regular accreditation process. The second module addresses environmental, social, and gender considerations in project design. 6 lessons in total. Lesson approval process with a 1 or 2 or 3 step approval. Lesson 2 covers the compliance with the Adaptation Fund's environmental and social policy, as well as the gender policy. Lesson 3 covers the risk identification process and its requirements. Lesson 4 describes the characteristics of a robust consultative process and grievance mechanism. Lesson 5 discusses the environmental and social management plan, the ESMP, and the monitoring, reporting, and evaluation requirements. And finally, lesson 6 rather offers detailed information on completing the relevant ESP, which is the environmental and social policies, and gender policy sections in the Adaptation Fund's apply for funding templates. This is just to give you a glimpse of what the interface of the course looks like once you connect to it, once you enroll rather. And here is quickly the links to accessing both the English and the French course. The course can also be accessed on the platform of the World Bank's Open Learning Campus, which is where the course is currently hosted. I'm going to quickly click on each link, but I'm also going to show you how to navigate on our website to get to the course. And just to quickly mention that for those of you who have access or have taken courses on the OLC platform already, you can enroll directly to the course, and I will show you how to do it through our website. For those of you who have never taken courses, you may have to create an account first. And again, there are instructions on the enrollment tips that are also posted on our website. You will see the English and the French one, and as I mentioned before, within a week or 2 weeks time, we will have the Spanish version as well. So let me click on the link. This will take you directly to the course, but I will rather go. Okay, so when you come to our website, you will go to the Knowledge and Learning microsite or tab, if you wish. Go to Knowledge Products and AF Knowledge Products. Then you go to the drop-down menu and select e-courses. And once you selected this category, you will see the 2 courses, the one in French and the one in English. So let's click on the English one for now. Okay, so you will have a brief description of the course, as well as a button to directly enroll. And for those of you, again, who have never taken courses on the OLC platform, you will have enrollment tips, which are quite detailed and comprehensive, and they walk you through ways to create an account and whatnot. But let's just assume that you are an OLC user, and you click on enroll, and it will take you directly to the World Bank Open Learning Campus website, where you will enroll, and you will probably be prompted to create that account. Okay, so let's see if it opens real quickly for you to see the interface. It may open to, okay, so, well, in my case, I have taken the course already, but this is the interface. You will have a course introduction, a very brief introduction here, and then you have module 1, and then you have module 2, and for each module and each lesson, essentially, you can download the notes or download the content and print them out for later use. And you have access to additional resources on the bottom, a course map, interesting link. You can also contact us in case there are glitches, and also an intro about the course. Okay, and this concludes my presentation, and I'm open for questions related to the course. Thank you. Let's see how I can stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much, Cristina. And we're open to all questions now. I'm really glad that we have a good time for questions. It was actually what we were striving for. We wanted 15 minutes at the least, and now it seems like we have a good 25 minutes to have a discussion and to answer your questions. And we can share our screens if you have questions about finding things on the Adaptation Fund website. I found that so useful, Cristina, how you were just showing how to navigate to everything, as well as any other questions that you may have. So I'm going to open the floor. Please feel free to unmute yourself as well as to use the chat box to ask a question. Well, while we're giving everyone just another minute or two to think of any questions that they want to ask, again, please feel free to use the chat box as well as to unmute yourself and to speak your question. One thing I wanted to add that I really appreciated about taking the e-course earlier this year is that after I took each of the lessons, I was able to download the summary from each of the lessons, and those are still documents that I find to be incredibly useful references, and I refer to in any work that I am doing regarding the Adaptation Fund. So I think this is a really excellent resource that can be used. And we have a question. Are the courses free? Yes. The e-course that Cristina just shared with us is 6 hours of free content. So I'm now going to broaden it beyond questions. If anybody has any experiences that they want to share with striving to engage with the Adaptation Fund. Oh, and we do have a question, but I do want to also keep it open for a broader conversation. So the question from Jose is that checking the accredited entities on the Adaptation Fund website, it seems there are not many CSOs. Is the Adaptation Fund interested in having more CSOs accredited, and is it open for INGOs? I'm going to start off by asking Young to share her thoughts on that question. If you could come in, Young.
Sure, that's a great question. For accreditation, the eligibility to apply for the accreditation is not confined to government entities. As you may see, that there are the non-governmental organizations which were accredited with us. So it's rather than about whether governmental organization or non-governmental organizations, it's more about whether the entity has its capacity and system to meet the accreditation criteria, and hopefully that it clarifies it. And let me know if you have further questions on that. So yes, it's open to the non-governmental organization.
And I can say from the perspective of civil society and the work that we have been doing to try and encourage more engagement with climate finance, this is absolutely something that we want to see. We want to see CSOs and NGOs.
I see.
Becoming accredited. I'm not sure if I can be heard at the moment because I hear someone else coming in, but this is a challenge, and it's a challenge in part because of the the way in which the climate finance architecture is oriented towards larger organizations with certain types of capacity and the human and technical resources to pursue accreditation, which is why the accreditation pathway was really an additional pathway that we presented in the brief rather than one of the four primary ways as one of the three primary ways of engaging with the Adaptation Fund. So we have a question about enhanced direct access and how it works for smaller CSOs. And that is another question that I'm going to punt over to Young to get her thoughts on. Thank you, Santosh, for that question.
Thank you for the question. I think enhanced direct access can be one of the ways that for CSOs or smaller CSOs to further engage with the Adaptation Fund. So the enhanced direct access means that the accredited national implementing entity will take the will make a decision on the distribution of the grants under their own criteria. So this would help the CSOs to access Adaptation Fund's resources through the national implementing entity. So that could be a way to, that could help the CSOs to more deeply or further engages in the Adaptation Fund's projects, and possibly that to also receive Adaptation Fund's resources. So yes, that the smaller CSOs or bigger CSOs can engage, and that's through the national implementing entity, which is implementing the enhanced direct access projects. And we do have, if I remember correctly, around 3 or 4 enhanced direct access projects. For example, the one in South Africa and the other one in Antigua, Barbuda, and Costa Rica one. And you may have, you may find more information on the project, on those projects on our website, as our website publish all the projects related documents like monitoring reports, evaluation report, and also project proposals as well.
Thank you so much. It looks like our next question is a question for Cristina, which is, what are the benefits of the e-course for research institutions working on climate change issues in developing countries? Cristina, can you speak to the benefits that a research institution might find in taking the e-course?
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, really the course is a good way to increase one's capacity and knowledge on the accreditation process. But for research institution, perhaps the second module is through the case studies that it includes, and it's quite a few of them, you can see ways in which the Adaptation Fund really considers environmental and social and gender policies in their projects at project design and implementation, and covering a multitude of sectors. I mean, we currently cover 8 sectors, so perhaps that would be of benefit for the research institutions. Thank you.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Is there someone that wants to come in with a voice question? And again, I want to, go ahead.
Just want to ask if how the women and young people can be part of the Adaptation Fund project, how they could be included in the planning stage.
Yeah, that is a really excellent question, because that's what we're really seeking is engagement and consultation with all stakeholders, particularly women and youth, from the beginning of the planning process for our project all the way through to implementation and monitoring and evaluation. And I would love to get Young's thoughts on how that can happen and the different ways in which she might have seen that happening with different Adaptation Fund projects.
Thank you for the question. I think some of our projects contain great gender components, also including, for example, sub-project or project activities were led by women's organizations. In my mind, what I remember is, for example, the project in Morocco was also led by many of the sub-projects or project activities were led by women's organizations. So as Tara explained it, accreditation pathway might be challenging for small women's organization to directly access adaptation funds financial resources. However, that stakeholder consultation is one way that to engage in the adaptation funds, because the stakeholder engagement is required to be conducted in a gender responsive way, and also ensures that the women's organizations and groups participation throughout the project cycle. So as Tara mentioned, that not only the before the planning or designing the project, also during the implementation and monitoring and evaluation process could provide a chance to engage in the project. Also, the new funding grants available under the medium-term strategy. For example, the innovation, small innovation grants are available to non-accredited entities as well. And here that the interested small entities, including women's organization, may contact the, as Tara introduced, the UNEP and UNDP, which is innovation facility that that could provide a chance to access the Adaptation Fund's financial resources. And also, there might be also some opportunities, as I mentioned, that not only the sub-projects, if implementing entities include the gender training components in the project, and that might be also a good opportunity to engage in the Adaptation Fund projects. Hopefully, that will provide some answers.
Thank you, Young. And I think that's a great segue into a comment that we have from Ellen, and I would love to invite Ellen to speak if she wants to unmute herself for a few minutes. Ellen works closely with the Adaptation Fund NGO network, and her comment says that one of the things that is really excellent about engaging with the Adaptation Fund is the ability to comment on project proposals. There's an open public comment period prior to each board meeting where the projects are presented, and the Secretariat really takes into account those CSO comments. And I know that this is something that the Adaptation Fund NGO network really promotes and disseminates out through their network as well. Ellen, would you like to say any further words about that or the Adaptation Fund NGO network in general?
Thank you, Tara, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, so I'm with Indigo Development and Change in South Africa, and we are a very active member of the Adaptation Fund NGO network. And as I was commenting, one of the really important ways to engage is prior to each board meeting, there is a public comment period when the Adaptation Fund Secretariat publishes every project that is coming up for board approval for public comment, and that's available on their website. As the AF NGO network, we try to send those projects that are coming up in the different regions to our regional members. So for example, if there's a project in to my colleagues, they have any information, very important aspect that we need comment on. So having women's organizations and organizations with skills in gender assessments and who would have knowledge of whether those processes have been conducted appropriately, are reflected accurately and appropriately in the project comment, in the project documents would be very, very helpful. So we try to coordinate some of that comment process through the AF NGO network, but these comments can also be submitted directly to the Secretariat. So our network, just to fill you in, is a network of NGOs that are interested in engaging on the Adaptation Fund. We, as I said, try to coordinate input to Adaptation Fund either at the board level or, as I said, on the local project level, keeping an eye on the projects that are taking place in our countries, giving some feedback, sharing lessons learned from those projects. So, and we really feel that this gender aspect, which is being covered in today's webinar, is really important. It's a side that is often lacking in our national implementing entities. They often don't have the skills to assess and to build their projects appropriately to take this issue into account. Thank you, Tara.
Ellen, and I hope that provides some deeper background on the different ways in which the Adaptation Fund NGO network is an excellent opportunity to really stay abreast of these opportunities that the Adaptation Fund provides, such as public commenting periods and different ways to engage and deepen your knowledge about the workings of the Adaptation Fund. With that, I would like to welcome another active member of the Adaptation Fund NGO network, Kavya, to speak a little bit about her experience and understanding on women's involvement in projects in India. Kavya, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara. I work with development alternatives in India, and we are an active member of the AF NGO network. In the last 1 year, we evaluated and monitored 4 Adaptation Fund projects in the country in partnership with CANSA. So I've also recently published an article on the gender insights from the projects that we have here. And if I just take specific examples from one of the projects in the country, we've seen that the involvement of women is at different levels in the project. They could be direct beneficiaries of the initiatives and the activities that are proposed in the project, and we see CSOs taking active measures to involve these women as leaders in the community. So it's a very effective way of reaching out to the other women in the community to get them involved in project activities, to make them understand the importance of shifting to practices that are climate adaptive and increase their resilience in the longer term. That's been very effective. But one thing that we've realized is that until and unless the activities are directed, the benefits of the activities are directed to the women, it's difficult to pull them into the loop, because I believe in most of the countries in the world, and it's rather more evident in a country like India, that women are not the major decision makers in households. So anything that involves use of family land or making some changes to infrastructure, it's usually the men who get to take these decisions. So we've realized that in a lot of these initiatives, the women don't get a say, and they're usually left behind. So we've identified a few steps where we see that more initiative from the NIs, which is NABARD in case of India, and also rather rigorous checks from the AF committee would help the NIs also consider gender aspects more vigorously in the work that they do, because gender needs to be considered at each of the steps in the project while designing, while the interventions are being done, and also when it should not be restricted to quantitative benefits at the end of the project. Just saying that 100 women benefited from it, it's not a long-term, should not be a long-term strategy. We need to see that it's actually made sustainable changes to their lives. So we do have some recommendations on that, which we put forth through the AFNGO network. And I'll be sharing the link to the article in the chat box for anyone who's interested in reading. That should be all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure many people will be interested in the link that you shared to your article highlighting some of these issues. So I want to recognize that we're coming close to the end of our time, but I think we have time for one more question. I don't see anything on the chat if someone wants to come in. Oh, sorry, I failed to scroll down on the chat. I do see a few other questions. And here's an excellent question for Young, which is the potential timeline for the Adaptation Fund Board to take a decision on this gender policy that is being updated right now. Young, can you speak to that?
Sure. Because of the COVID-19 situation, the board meeting, which was supposed to be held in March 2020, where the updated gender policy was supposed to be presented for board's consideration and approval, didn't happen because the meeting was canceled, and therefore that we hope that the face-to-face meeting will be held in October. And the gender policy, for example, the substantive policy change needs some extensive discussions among the board members, and therefore that the virtual meeting was considered insufficient platform to do that. And at this moment that the COVID situation is very fluid, and therefore that we are actively consulting with the board to move on this the agenda, including the gender policy update, which was not taken up at the March meeting because of the cancellation. So at this moment, the schedule is the October meeting if it cannot be held because of the COVID situation, then we are also discussing on the plan B. And I can take the question on the Bangladesh Adaptation Fund, how to access the Adaptation Fund. And I would really encourage, as Cristina presented, the e-learning course to take, and that will really give you an idea or a big picture on how Adaptation Fund works, and also how to access Adaptation Fund. And e-learning course on accreditation would really help you understand what would be the first step to start the process. I'll stop here. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Young. So I think that brings us right on time to a wrap up and closing. And I want to just go back to each of the speakers, Cristina and Young, for a 30-second set of final thoughts, and then we will share how you can stay in touch with the speakers as well as the institutions that we represent, and then send around the recording and link to the brief and our follow-up materials to this webinar. So Cristina, could I come over to you first for any closing thoughts that you would like to share?
Sure, Tara. So as Young mentioned, I highly encourage all the participants to visit our website and access the course in all 3 languages in order to increase their capacity and knowledge, both on accreditation as well as on addressing our policies, environmental, social, and gender in project design. And not only for that, but also visit the website under the knowledge tab. There's one called Knowledge Theme, where we have collected all the knowledge products we produce on the gender, and that includes the gender videos, the flyers related to gender in our projects, the publication that Yang mentioned on an overview of gender in our in the AF portfolios in select cases, as well as the course and others. And also what you can find on the website is more information on the innovation grants that Yang mentioned that are available to non-accredited entities, CSOs, grassroots organizations, and whatnot. And again, these are grants that are going to be launched to an aggregator from the UNDP and UN Environment, and will probably be launched sometimes in the fall, depending on the situation with COVID and whatnot. Over to Yang.
Thanks, Cristina. I'd like to wrap up with the message that gender equality really needs concerted efforts, which means that fund alone cannot achieve gender equality, but it needs and requires all the stakeholders, including all of you, women's organizations, groups, efforts, not only our implementing entities. So we are trying to provide better support for gender components and considerations are well integrated or implemented on the ground to lead to better gender equality and women's empowerment. Therefore, that we hope that the more women's organizations and other parties could further engage in the Adaptation Fund's projects to further achieve that to further contribute to achieving gender equality and women's empowerment around the globe. Thank you. Over to you, Tara. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm really grateful for this event and to WEDO organization to organize this great webinar and provide opportunity to collaborate with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yang. We really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you as well, because drawing on some of Cristina's final thoughts, we really feel that it's key that we take advantage of the opportunities to learn as much as possible and to recognize the materials and the resources that may be out there in order to deepen our knowledge. And this helps us not only become potential participants as we're engaging with the Adaptation Fund in the ways that Yang has highlighted, but as well as better advocates as we advocate for not only the Adaptation Fund, but all climate finance architecture to be oriented toward gender responsive climate finance and to integrate gender equality at every level of their operations and processes, which includes but is not limited to providing new access mechanisms for women's organizations and grassroots organizations to access funding directly for their climate solutions. So with that, thank you so much for spending some of your morning, afternoon, or evening with us talking about engaging with the Adaptation Fund, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, and we will send out the materials from this webinar and look forward to staying in conversation with many of you as you continue to deepen your engagement with gender responsive climate finance. Thanks.